Okay, welcome everyone. It is now 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get our webinar started for today. Our topic today is Caregiving During a Pandemic, Part 2. Many of you joined us in Part 1. In Part 2, we'll look at dealing with grief and challenging behaviors and difficult emotions. So before we get started, my name is Keisha Lewis, and I will be moderating the webinar for today. I would like everyone to know that the participants on the call will be muted and you're in what we call listen-only mode. Today, we'll be asking you to complete a series of polling questions. These questions have been designed to help us learn what the needs of our caregivers in the community are. Once the poll questions begin, you'll have 30 seconds to answer each question. Please note, the answers are anonymous, and this is to be used for our information purposes only. So I will not be able to see how each participant responded to the answers. If you're on the phone listening, you will not be able to participate in our polling questions. And for those of you that have questions, we ask that you just place those questions in the chat box. And what we'll do is we'll ensure that we answer your questions and follow up with you. The speakers will be able to follow up with you at the conclusion of the presentation. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ms. Angie Body of the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging Incorporated and Ms. Lauren Pongan of the Diverse Elders Coalition, just to bring greetings. So I am going to stop sharing for a minute and I am going to highlight Ms. Body. Ms. Body, if you could just say some greetings for us today.
Good morning. I'm Angie Body, Director of Health Programs with the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and this morning. Pardon me, I haven't had my coffee. And many thanks to our guest speakers. We appreciate you joining us again and look forward to your insights. And thank you again. I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thank you, Angie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Pongan. I'm the National Director of Diverse Elders Coalition. I feel really lucky to be here with you all today and just hear a little bit more about your experiences. I know dealing with grief and difficult emotions is a really tough topic, but I really trust NCBA and its speakers to lead us through this with grace and really provide useful resources for everyone. So thank you so much. And as Keisha mentioned, polling questions, we really just want to get to hear from you all about what your experiences have been so that we know, what other supports people need, especially caregivers in this, what can be a difficult time, but also, can be a time of joy and coming together and strength of community. So thank you so much for all that you'll be sharing with us. And I'm very excited to learn from our speakers as well. So have a wonderful morning or afternoon, I guess, on the East Coast to everyone. And I'll turn it back to Keisha.
Okay, great. So with that being said, everyone, I'm going to just launch the first poll so you can get familiar with it. And then I'll go into our first half of our panel here. So the first poll is just going to allow me to get some background on who we have on the call here. So I am going to launch the poll. And what you'll see is a series of questions on your screen from 1 through 5, 5, I think. And if you would just take your time and answer those questions for me. And again, I'll give you about 30 to 40 seconds to answer them. The first question is, are you currently providing care to a loved one or friend? So if you would answer that for us. And the second question is, have you experienced the loss of a family member or a friend due to COVID-19 during the last 18 months? And the third question is, have you experienced the loss of a family member or friend from another illness? And then our fourth question is, have you experienced any of the following? And you can select all that apply, those losses in the last 18 months. And then our final question is, what would you consider yourself overwhelmed with emotion over the past 18 months? So take your time. I'm going to give you some more time to respond. I see the responses coming in there. And again, this is anonymous. I won't be able to tell who and how you responded. And I'm going to give you probably about 30 more seconds here to answer those questions. A little bit more time. I still see the responses coming in. Thank you all for sharing. Okay, I am going to close that first poll and we're going to move on to the next part of our presentation here. Okay. I'm going to bring up the presentation here. So during the last, I would say 18 or 19 months during the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have experienced grief. The past 18 months have been very difficult and challenging for us all. And many of us have come to know more about pain and grief than we care to imagine. We know that grief appears in many ways, and I have also come to learn about the loss of a loved one. Grief is something that we can experience in the loss of life as we once knew it, as well as the experiences that change our daily routines and our habits. For many of us, the old comforts of the world and how we once knew it and the stability no longer exist. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we interact with others. Many of us have been unable to visit our loved ones when death occurs, or unable to mourn death with family and friends. The loss of loved ones and the loss of what we once knew, compounded by the pandemic occurring at the same time, has just been complicated by the ability to adapt, to heal, to manage and recover during this time. So grieving the loss of a loved one, grieving the physical connections that we have with others. Even when we started the webinar, we talked about the ability for us to be able to go to church. Many of us grieve that loss. So coping with fear and anxiety about the future has really been overwhelming. So today our goal is to discuss some of the grief that we've experienced as a caregiver, the grief that we experience as individuals. So in the next 90 minutes, we will have a rich conversation to help us unpack grief and learn ways to manage it, as well as discuss challenging behaviors of our loved ones when we are providing care. And then we will conclude with how to manage our own emotional well-being and how to manage grief during this difficult time. So our first speaker that I'm going to introduce is Dr. Ebony Green. Dr. Green is the president and CEO of Caregiver Support Services, and she is a registered nurse and family caregiver with extensive experience on health and wellness of caregivers. She is the author of 3 books, At the Heart of the Matter, Caregiving in the New Millennium, and Reflections from the Soul. Dr. Green works with caregiving communities to teach the importance of self-care while caring for someone you love. So I now present to you Dr. Green.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about a topic that is challenging to explore, but I also believe in the importance of exploring this topic. As Keisha mentioned, Ms. Lewis mentioned that we have been through a lot this past year. And so I think that it is very important for us to not only acknowledge our feelings, but to have the ability to recognize them first before we can even acknowledge what it is that we are experiencing. So we'll go ahead and go to the first slide. And so there's a really excellent author. Her name is Linda Lucy, and she discusses in the Great God Hunt, she talks about some challenges that she experienced. She cared for her parents, but her experience with grief began when her 18-year-old son, let me back up. Her experience began when her young son, he was maybe 10 or 11, they lived on a farm, and he had the dream of traveling from coast to coast to see the country riding a horse. He wanted to do that. And so he worked wrote letters and things, and worked with John Deere to make sure the horses would be fed. And so him and his mother were going to set out on this year-long adventure. So right before they could go on this trip, he was in an accident on the farm and passed away. And so Linda goes on the trip herself. It was a full year, and she figures that she's kind of on a equal grounding, or she's feeling more grounded. And her 19-year-old son, who was in the military, he ends up committing suicide. And so she says, triumphing over grief is never easy. I used to think that life was getting past the obstacle, just beyond the obstacle, to get to the other side. I just needed to get there to live again. But you know what? Life is not on the other side of the challenge. Life is the challenge. The challenge is the journey. Getting to the other side is just the pit stop where you can re-energize before the next hurdle is in front of you. With each loss, every challenge, every obstacle, it empowers me to know that I am gaining the courage and wisdom to live life beyond what it used to be. Triumphing over grief, challenge, and adversity is never easy, but is surprisingly simple. And all you have to do is have faith in yourself and beyond, and the courage to take the next step. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we're talking today about that. We're not saying that we're going to work to get over grief. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. A lot of us right now are experiencing what we would call or term anticipatory grief. And this is where maybe you have grief to your fears associated with losing your loved one. I am going through some situations with my dad, retired military officer, was in a car accident, a man that has lived a exemplarily and beautiful life. And the car was on fire. He's been in the hospital now about 45 days. We don't know where or what is going to happen. It is our faith that keeps us going. And so I have days where I feel like you're anticipating loss, and then you have days where you feel more hopeful. Your anticipatory grief, if you're caring for a loved one that is not having necessarily an accident or incident, but maybe a chronic illness, maybe something that you're not recognizing in yourself that you're feeling this way. And so it can begin from the diagnosis of a life-threatening disease, and then it can continue through the progression of the disease. I personally feel like when we have periods of stability in our caregiving situation, we may not be associating the way that we're feeling deep down inside with the fact that we are experiencing some level, some measure of anticipatory grief. We can go to the next slide. So these are possible reactions to anticipatory grief. So you may find that you are overthinking. I definitely have that capability without being in a grieving process, but you can be, thinking of 50 different ways to approach a situation. And that can increase your distress over time. You may have extreme concerns about your loved one. The signs and feelings that everything is going to be okay may not be as constant. And so that can be distressing, especially if you're not, again, identifying that in your self, that, okay, some of what I'm experiencing is just, is normal, and it is just associated with the way that I'm feeling about my loved one. Depression and anxiety, we see that a lot. And making sure that we do those healthy things for ourselves, but making sure that we reach out if we're experiencing a level of depression and anxiety for professional assistance. And then you might begin to think about the social reactions to an expected loss of someone you love, especially now during the pandemic, where there may not be the ability to actually attend services and things. We've had several family members, cousins and such, pass away, and the only way that we were able to attend or connect has been through Zoom or sending things to the family. We can go to the next slide, please. So you may also be thinking, again, sometimes it's not that you're thinking it on the surface, it's within you, that how are you going to manage to live if something happens? You may be thinking about how your loved one may not be able to be there to celebrate. And it may be maybe your graduation, but it could also be their grandchildren, because they're involved in caring for our parents and loved ones as well. They're emotionally vested in their grandparents' lives. You may also be thinking about, especially when we're referring to caregiving, if you're caring for a parent, you're looking for that paternal aspect, which is not gone, but it is, in some ways, you're doing things that are reciprocal. And so the way that the relationship has worked in the past is different. And I think that's one of the big things that, when we just talk about challenging behaviors and things, is the dynamics of the relationship. It will be hard to accept that this is this reality now that your loved one is gone. So if you do lose a loved one, it can be difficult. I know when my mother-in-law passed away, I just kept really busy. And it was a year later when I had my emotional crash, because I needed to stay strong, or I felt I needed to stay strong. I cried and went through some differences in emotions, but it wasn't what it was a year later, where I was actually beginning to process what her not being down the street meant to my life and my children's lives. We can go to the next slide. I want to stress to you today, so if you don't get anything out of what I'm saying today, except for what's on this slide, I want you to think about this. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did phenomenal research. She interviewed thousands of people toward the end of life, individuals who had received a chronic or a diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis. And so she interviewed these folks in her health organization for a long period of time, over a long period of time. And so the grief, the stages of grief that we apply often to ourselves, I want you to remember that when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was writing the stages of grief, she was referring to the person that's dying or that has received a terminal diagnosis. And so that you're going to, within this year of receiving this terminal diagnosis, or within this certain period of time, most people will get to a point of acceptance, and they will be able to accept their diagnosis and in some ways cope with their own passing. We have applied Elizabeth Kubler-Ross very broadly to the living. There are some applicable points, but we as living folks do not process grief in the same way. And so what happens is that we think that within this year, we're going to, once things get back to normal, or you've lost a loved one and you're grieving, or you've lost a job and you're grieving that, that at some point we're going to get to this point of acceptance. Grief does not work that way. It's like all of these three below the after a year later, that you're going to have the steady progression, and then at the end of this year you're going to now have these really solid coping mechanisms. It's going to change. Loss changes you. You will have times where you feel really good about memories, and you will have times where you walk in and a song brings you back to that loss, or you walk in and you see something that your parent or grandparent said, written somewhere, and it brings a smile to your face. So I want you to not put the pressure on yourself that you're going to work through this grief, and then in a year, the dream of how your retirement was going to be, or what have you. There's continuous coping for those experiences in life. And so we try to at least experience some level of homeostasis at some time, but it doesn't mean that we will, it will be this succinct process. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So there's 3 common myths, and I just want you to think of these. Again, the goal of grief work is to find closure. My mother-in-law has been gone 4 or 5 years now. I can be brought to tears or have a rough day on that at any point, and so can my husband and children. So that's a myth. But you will succinctly move through the 5 stages of grief, and then in about a year, the weight of your sadness will be lifted. That is another thing. If your loved one had a significant daily interactions with you, or significant relationship with you, you're going to feel that loss for the rest of your life. Does it mean that it's going to be a terrible every day? No, probably not. But you will have moments of sadness. And that grief is a condition that should be treated. Again, not unless we're seeing signs of like complicated grief. And I'll mention that toward the end of the presentation, or the end of these slides. But normal grief, normal sadness that comes and goes is normal. We're people, we love, and when someone is no longer there, we miss them. We can go to the next slide. And I think there's a poll question for this one, if I'm correct. Maybe. So common emotions that are associated with grief, I want you to think about the emotions that you feel. So these are not stages of grief. These are common emotions that, especially during this time where we haven't necessarily had relief from the overall feeling of the overall experience of the pandemic and COVID, that you may experience any one of these emotions at any time. You may feel angry. You may have tears, and then sometimes think of something hilariously funny and laugh. You may feel distress, where you just feel like you can't even figure out where to start to address your feelings. Anxiety. You may feel emotional and social isolation. Especially since people cannot necessarily see your face when you're talking, if you're talking on phone, if you're not using a medium like Zoom. And then if folks are not experiencing the same things that you are experiencing, it can be very lonely. When we were caring for our daughter, she's perfectly fine now, but when she was 16, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And we went through a whole year of real challenging situations. Everybody else in our peer group's children were healthy. It's very hard for folks with healthy kids to try to even put on the hat of what would you do if something was going on with your child? And so I feel like we lost part of our social connection because during that year or so, our friends were continuing to do normal things that we all would do together. And we were really coping with a serious caregiving situation. So that may be happening to you now. And that can be very distressing. You may also feel depression and then guilt and regret. And I find that most of us are who are caregivers, we're type A personalities. It is easy for us to feel guilty, even when we know we've gone above and beyond. So just keep in mind that these do not represent stages of grief. They're not process oriented, but these might be some common emotions that can be experienced when you are grieving. Okay, we can go.
Dr. Green, I missed your poll, but
Oh.
would you like me to put that up so you can see how the individuals on the call are currently
That'd be great.
feeling? All right,
Because
so
they've
I'm
been
gonna put
listening.
that
Yak,
poll
yak,
up.
yak. Okay.
And I realize I put all of them together, but I'm just going to go ahead and launch that poll and they can answer number one. I apologize for that. I was trying to fix it.
No problem.
So if those on the phone, if you could take the time and just answer that question number one for me, which emotion describes your current mood? And Dr. Green did just go over that, but if you could just answer that, that would give us some insight to how you're feeling and who we have on the call. So for those of you on the phone, can you try to answer that question for me? Oh, there we go. I see you. We have been in the Zoom space, I think, for a whole year now, but sometimes I think I still have challenges. So I'm going to give you all a few more seconds to answer these questions here. And I apologize. I lumped them together.
No problem. That's great.
Right.
That's what we're going to talk about here in a moment. So it's all good.
Okay. So thank you, the participants on the call. Thank you for answering those questions. And I'm going to give you just a few more minutes. And I'll pull them back up again in case you didn't get a chance to answer one of them. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, and then I'll bring it back up again.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you.
So then I want you to think about what is influencing your grief. So again, life experiences, and I often talk about how I was exposed to someone passing away as a child versus when I became a nurse, how that was a much more catering to me type situation so that it wasn't traumatizing. So life experiences, how your first experienced grief first, was it scary? Those types of things can influence how you process your sadness. A big thing for our families is the position or station. So if you're the matriarch or the patriarch of the family, even if it is an informal aspect of the family, you're that go-to person, it can be a lot more challenging because everybody is coming to you with their feelings. And so then are you having an opportunity to even acknowledge how you're feeling yourself because you're holding everybody else together? The personal relationship between you and your loved one, what was that like? Everybody has a little bit of a different relationship with their family member. And so depending on what that relationship was or is, that can influence your sadness even right now while you're still caring for them. And then the big one, family conflicts. So when you have family members who are either not involved, and I know there's some folks on the call that have really phenomenal examples of what it looks like to work together, but there are families where the conflicts are so distressing, so vast, that it can be hard to get anywhere with the actual caring. And so then that can complicate your grief later on down the road. We can go to the next slide. We want to think too about peer groups, because sometimes when you're saying, you know, this is what I'm going through at work, with our friends, for our social life, for our church life, and we are trying to explain this, you get the response of, ooh, I'm glad I'm not having to experience that. That must be really hard. That can be, again, more of a distancing type of response. And so you may end up compromising your job, your finances, relationships with friends, the ability to go places. And think about, this is also impacting your loved one too, because their life has changed as a result of the pandemic. And then physical and emotional health. So all of these things can, especially the social life and your finances, your ability to go to the doctor, your insurance, those types of things can really complicate your grief. We can go to the next slide. I love the ladies with the hats. So dealing with reactions from your peer groups. So they may be focusing on their life goals, meeting friends, enjoying parties. Now, I do know that my age category now, most folks are experiencing caring for parents, but it wasn't always so. It may be difficult to explain your caregiving situation. The things that are going on with my dad, when I talk to my mom, I try to, we have a page on Caring Bridge where she tells us what's going on with him each day. When I call her, I don't ask her questions about what's going on because she posts about that. And I know that when I feel most emotional is when people are asking me how he's doing. And I know we're similar in that regard. So I try to focus on other things. I know we know, you know, what's going on with dad, and check on how she's doing, because otherwise you start to feel like you don't even want to answer the phone because you don't want to talk anymore about dad's condition. Your only social connection may be your loved one that for whom you're caring. That means that when they are frustrated, you're going to be on the receiving end of their emotions. You often lash out at the folks that you are most comfortable with and with the folks that you are around the most. And so this can be one of the things that as you're caring for someone, you feel guilty because you're frustrated, and you're frustrated because you feel guilty because your loved one is not treating you in a respectful manner. And how do you work through that? So we do see a lot of increases in depression, isolation, and loneliness. And it is not just related only to actual losing someone that you love, but the whole process of the steady decline and having had to be, you know, together so much with very few outlets. Okay, the next slide. This is the second really important thing that matters. And this is how families process grief. Because we often will see, and we'll even say, it was so much different when grandma was around because everybody got together. A lot of times those challenges in relationships do relate back to how family members who are caring for someone, how they cope with grief. And because someone who you're caring for, you have this deeper level of intimacy that's not experienced in other relationships. You're there at the hospital. You're there when someone's scared. You're there when there's a new diagnosis. You're there when someone is scared in the middle of the night. So it provides an additional layer of intimacy. And so your grief can be more complicated depending on that relationship. And I'm going to be cognizant of time. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So I did share with Miss Keisha this booklet that I hope that can be emailed or shared in some way, because I feel like family responses to grief, you have folks that, you know, are very good with sharing their emotions, but that can be overwhelming. You have folks who are considered the rock of the family, so they don't ask for help. And so in the caregiving sphere, we have different family members reacting to grief differently. And if we don't get our arms around that, we can then change relationships significantly and feel less connected to our loved ones. And so this little guide provides you with some definitions there of the different responses to grief, and then some tips on how you might pull together as a family to work through your sadness. So we can go to the next slide. The big thing is identifying too if you have complicated grief. And often for those of us who've been providing care for a long period of time, this is where your sadness is persistent for 6 months or longer. There's a general disengagement from participation in normal day or everyday activities. You find that you're burying your feelings, you feel hopeless. You may be experiencing a form of complicated grief. And so we can see that sometimes families experience or individuals have complicated grief-related depression. It can disrupt our spiritual well-being. And so some folks will have a whole change or questioning in their belief system. That is extremely distressing. And then a lot of us also have post-traumatic grief responses. So that would take a full another session to really talk about it, but there's some great examples of how people work through those types of emotions and situations that are shared in a book that I wrote. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So you want to think about where I've told you all these really interesting things, I hope, about grief. And you want to start thinking about how you can address your feelings. And so identifying your biggest triggers is one of the most important things. So being able to figure out what is triggering your grief. And this may be something that you need to work with someone to figure out what it is. And by that, I mean a counselor, therapist. Try to be mindful not to place time constraints on yourself. Remember that it's your soul that determines your divine pace of how you feel and how you're feeling. I know when I'm really feeling sad, because I'll hide in my room and I will be like, okay, I'm in this room too much, so I need to get out here and do some things and readjust what I'm doing, even if it's just changing which room I'm in. Remember that you're mapping the appropriate healing that you can facilitate, and that you can facilitate this by welcoming the epiphany or awakening as it occurs through your dedication to care for yourself. And then make sure that you take a step back and remove yourself from the opinions of others so that you can decide what you need to cope. And then my last, I want to leave you with this so we can go to the next slide. I find this so helpful because, and this is Letters to a Young Poet. And it says, I beg you to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked in rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Do not search for the answers, which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. Okay, I hope I didn't go too long. I'm going to hand it over. Oh, this is the Reflections from the Soul that I mentioned. And then there's also a free Understanding Grief guide. You can find that on the Caregiver Support Services website. It talks more about the emotions that I mentioned. It has some really great tips and tools that you can use right away. And then the Reflections from the Soul talks about my personal experiences with grief. And then I also use historical folks to talk about how they work through like complicated grief and spiritual grief and those types of things. So thank you for sharing that.
So thank you, Dr. Green. I will add your website, and the resource toolkit that she mentioned will be available to everyone after the presentation today. I'll make sure that you all get it. It's a PDF booklet, and I think that will be helpful for you all. So thank you, Dr. Green. We'll move on to our next segment, and Dr. Green may come back and jump in and add some additional topics. But now we're going to hear from a caregiver, and we're going to actually have a unique opportunity to hear from the person who she provides care to. So I'm going to pose a question to you all in the audience, and you don't have to answer, but if you want to add it to the chat box, you're more than welcome. Feel free. But for those of you in the audience who are providing care, have you ever felt, and I'm just going to leave this blank, I love my whoever, but I just don't like them? So when we look at age and illness, it can bring out a host of difficult emotions in those individuals that we provide care to. Caregivers are often subjected to feelings of anger and fear and frustration and sadness. As a primary caregiver, one might often experience a great deal of pressure, often making their job of the caregiver more difficult. So I often think about my experiences, and I'm going to stop sharing because I realize you guys can't see me there. There we go. I am sorry about that. There we go. And I'm going to highlight myself. I'm sorry about that, guys, again. All right. All right, so there we go. So I often think about my experiences assisting in the care of my grandparents, and I thought to myself, what if I had to rely on someone to do things for me? How would I feel if I no longer had control over my physical abilities or my financial abilities? I think I would feel frustrated. Sometimes I might even feel helpless or angry. And so I've always been fiercely independent. So the thought of me losing my independence is absolutely frightening. And many of the people that we provide care to feel the same way. So now we have we couple those feelings with longstanding personality traits that we all have. And this can result in unpleasant ways. An irritable person may frequently become enraged, whereas an impatient person often becomes more demanding and more difficult to please. So when a person becomes sick or disabled, not only does their life change, but the lives of everyone around them changes too. And this can result in what we call challenging behaviors. And this may make it hard to provide care or cope with that individual. So now I'm actually going to have Miss Sharon and her husband talk to us. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Miss Conway, she was here with us before, and she's been a caregiver for at least 16 different family members over the last 35 years, ranging in ages from 3 to 98. Mr. Conway, Mr. Hampton Edward Conway, he's joining us, and I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself. But Miss Conway has been providing care to her husband, I think for the last, is it the last 25 years, Miss Conway? Somewhere in there.
16.
16 years.
mean,
Okay.
if
All
you want
right.
to be
There we go.
technical,
Okay.
57, but yeah, yes, 16.
Okay. All right. And so they're going to come together and they're going to just provide a perspective. They've been married for over 52 years. So I'm going to clap on that because that is love and commitment. And like she said, she's been his primary caregiver for the last 16 years. So they're going to give us a perspective on what is it to be a caregiver, and then Mr. Hampton, we're going to enjoy his perspective on what it is to receive that care. So I'm going to spotlight you all, and I am going to hand it over to you all to share for us.
Thank you very much. I was quite surprised when I got the invitation when Sharon said, hey, look, there's going to be a caregiver seminar and I want you to be a part of it. Okay. Oh, really? Okay. So here we are. I am a 74-year-old guy that's used to doing everything on his own when he wants to, what he wanted to. And now I am an amputee. I don't have a left arm. You can see my little shoulder move there, but there's nothing connected to it. Okay, that's it. Okay. That was a result of a motorcycle accident. A tractor trailer ran a red light 16 years ago and hit me on my motorcycle and it took my arm. But I'm very grateful to be alive, and I'm grateful that Sharon still loves me. Okay. But it has been a challenge recently because 8 years ago I had a fall and it tore my rotator cuff in my right shoulder. Well, on the September the 17th, I had to have a shoulder replacement. And this replacement, if you can picture in your mind an ice cream cone, that's what it looks like in my shoulder. When they do an x-ray, it looks like with one scoop of ice cream on it. That's what they replaced my shoulder with. You can see it, perfectly shaped cone with a ball on the top, the ice cream. And it has changed the way my arm moves. I cannot put my arm behind my back. So my beloved has to do everything for me, okay? And that's why we are here. I love this girl. I've been dating her for 57 years. I love her. Wouldn't want to be without her. We live full-time in our RV, as you can see around us. And it's a 42-foot long machine. And it's only like at this widest point, maybe
15 feet.
12, 15 feet. And at the widest. And we've been living in here for 2 years, okay? And I wouldn't want to be in here without her, okay? That's me, okay?
For me, I have been Hampton's primary caregiver for 16 years. When he lost his arm, he didn't really grieve the loss. Now, I couldn't tell whether he grieved it or not because he just never got down. And but I knew that I was going to be the one to do just about everything that his left arm was doing. He was left-handed too. His left hand had been doing for himself, but he recovered so well. There were very few things that he was not able to do for himself. Just the bathing, he couldn't wash his back and down his bottom or his leg because you fall over, try to, the shower in the RV is so small. If he bent over to wash his legs or something like that, he hit his head on the side of the shower. So I've always been able to do that, and a couple of times helping him get dressed, something like that. But he's always been very even-tempered, very sweet. He's been an awesome husband, and loving every moment of those 57 years, excuse me, babe. It's only been since he has, we've had this in the last 4 weeks, I would say, since he had this operation where he can't use his arm at all, that I have noticed an increase in tension. I'm calling it tension. I forgot. Keisha, you said the word before, and I had to smile when you said, I can't remember what the word was, but anyway, yeah, it's been happening. And he's been lashing out. I make sure I read everything that he's going to be having. I try to not be behind the 8 ball, but anticipate what his next step is, what his next step in his journey, his therapy. And when he was getting ready to have surgery, I watched the surgery online. And so I knew everything was going to happen to him. And I was a scientist, a biologist. So when they were talking about how they took his shoulder and they reversed it and used the muscles from here and here, and I knew as a result of that, he was not going to return to normal anymore. There were going to be a lot of limitations that he would not be able to handle in lifting. He is not going to be able to reach behind his back. And I asked him a couple days ago, I said, Ham, suppose what we have now, your physical recovery right now is where it will always be. How would you feel? And he just grimaced. He never answered me. So I'm going to be very interested to hear what he has to say to you all. But it's been a challenge because we are isolated by COVID to some extent. But we get out. We've been going to church. We wear our masks. I double mask, and so we've been able to do that. But because we are here all the time, and when he gets frustrated with something I'm asking him to do, he'll say, "Stop treating me like a kid. I'm not a kid." He doesn't even remember it. And or he'll just roll his eyes. I didn't know men could roll their eyes, but he knows how to roll his eyes. He can give lessons on that. And so there are things like that. And I told him a couple days ago, I think I may have said it twice, which he doesn't like that either. And I said, you know what? I need you to understand that all I'm doing for you, I could do it from now to your last breath and never complain. And I don't. Anything I do for I count it an honor, because for the first 25 or 30 years of our marriage, I was the one he was giving care to because I had so much problems in the beginning of our marriage. And so I told him that, I said, but the one thing I can't get over that I refuse to accept as part of this caregiving is your attitude, because you got a nasty attitude. And I have noticed that in the last 4 weeks. And his surgery was September the 17th. And yes, right now it's almost a whole month, and he has, it's been a bit much. And so he doesn't remember it. A lot of times he just says it and goes on, and I don't address it. And I don't talk about it to, I have one good friend, and I'll talk about it with her. But other than that, that's just the way it is. And and I feel guilty. There's a guilt associated with this too, is I want to make sure I'm doing my very best. And there are times when I'm sitting down. I'll go all day from the time I wake up in the morning until the time I'm getting ready to go to bed, and I may not sit down. And if I do sit down, I feel that may be viewed by him that I may not be on my job, and that there's a break right there. You've never said, sweetheart. No, I know you. Anyway, wait a minute.
When you sit down, you're supposed to sit down.
Well, let me give you an example, since we're being honest today. One of the organizations that we belong to asked us to do asked him to do a video and to get it all together like that. And so Hampton sent me this information this time last week. And I have been trying to get to the point where I could sit down and do it. And when he asked me if I had gotten it done, and in my head, I'm saying, gotten it done. I said, look, you fed. I've been cooking dinner 2-3 times a day. The place is clean. You're clean. A good day, I brush my teeth. And you asked me if I did this video. And so I still haven't done the video, and I've been trying. Lord have mercy, I've been trying. I just don't have time.
Yeah, the event is coming up on the 23rd of October.
Oops. Well, maybe I got 10 more days. Maybe I might get to it. Okay. Oh, wow. I know, honey. I tell you, well, one of those things you said about neglecting, if I do that, there's something about you that's not going to get done.
That's okay, because whatever it is, I'm not going to need it to get done. I'd rather see you just go ahead and get it done, get it out the way. Okay, that's all.
We'll talk about that.
Part of the thing is, I believe also, is because I'm used to doing things on my own, and I'm limited to what I can do on my own now. I was celebrating last night. You're going to think this is weird, but I was celebrating last night. Sharon was watching TV in the bedroom, and I had to go to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, and when I came, one of the things I'm looking forward to after when I start my therapy next week is to be able to do more things on my own. And believe it or not, one of my goals is to be able to pull my pants up by myself, okay? And you may laugh at that, But I'm talking about being able to, without anyone's assistance, pull my pants up by myself. And I figured out a way how I can do that last night. And I started laughing. Thank you, Lord. I got it. I got it. Okay. I have to use the doorknob, the bathroom doorknob, to put my pants on that and turn around. If you can picture someone taking a rubber tire off of the rim of the car, okay? When you watch those guys, how they stick something in there and pull the tire over the rim and it turns around, and then they do it again and it turns around and the tire is off of the rim. That's just about what I'm doing with my pants, to pull them up over my butt, okay? Because I can't reach my hand in the back to pull them up. Okay, but I was just celebrating that. And it was like a great victory, okay? Those are kind of things. I think my shortcoming is when I want to do something for myself and I can't, and I have to ask her to do it for me. Okay, that gets me, okay? It really bothers me. And I get kind of short because if I could have, I would have done it without bothering her, without asking her, and it's done. I can pull my own pants up, or I can reach up and get the milk out of the refrigerator without her assistance. I can't do that stuff anymore. Okay. I'm looking forward to the point of starting this therapy next week so that I can get more motion, more range of motion in my arm. Okay. But that's it. I appreciate my girl. I wouldn't know what to do if she wasn't here. Okay. I really would.
Yeah, one of the things, I saw one of the questions Keisha sent, and I forgot what it was, but anyway, my answer to it, it was talking about when your caregiver, or when your person you're caring for lashes out at you, what do you say? I might have read it someplace. Anyway, and my comeback was, all this, I can't even, I had to clean this up because we're on PG rated. How you gonna talk to somebody like that who, takes care of all your stuff? And but
I don't know what I said to make you say that.
well, I didn't say it. I thought about it. That's why I don't say, and that's one of the other frustrations is, how do you make that transition from lover? We're best friend, lover, and all that involves, and now to caregiver. And it's been a rough transition because I want him to still feel like my lover. I want us to still be best friends. And so it hurts when I try to keep him from injuring himself, for him to say, you treat me like a child,
Yeah.
and
it was, the thing was, I had to keep my arm close to my side, so I can't extend it for anything, to pick up anything. So I think I was putting the curtains up in here. And she was hollering at me for that. Boy, don't do that.
I didn't holler.
I can do that.
I don't
Yeah,
holler.
but you
I never holler.
okay. Anyway, if I keep my hand to my side with my wrist, I can grab a hold of the curtain and bend at my knees, and the curtain will go down, then it will go up all the way.
It'd be so much easier
Or I
to
can
call
push
me,
him.
honey.
Yeah, but you're doing something else. Okay. That's all it is. Okay. Really is minute when you think about it. Y'all fussing over that? Yeah. Yeah, we are. Okay.
It's good to be old because we don't remember.
Yeah. Go ahead, Keisha. What are you gonna say, baby?
So no, I was just gonna say, Mr. and Mrs. Conway, we appreciate your realness, your truth, and your honesty about what it really means to be a caregiver and to provide care. And I think in hearing from you all, you'll probably be invited back so we can do a whole session on just that, because this is the truth and it's real.
Wow.
But just to give me some information before we have to move on to our next speaker, I want to actually launch a poll, because I had a poll here because I wanted to know how other people feel or deal with challenging behaviors. So I'm going to actually launch that poll. But what I heard from the two of you, and you all can answer the questions to the poll while I'm talking. But what I heard from the two of you was, it doesn't matter how difficult it gets. You all have been in it for the long haul for the last 52 years, in caring for each other, and loving each other. And it does take the love and the patience when those challenging behaviors come into play. But I also like, Ms. Conway, that you're able to tell Mr. Conway how you feel, and that matters and that's important. So if you all would just take a few minutes to answer those 4 questions that you see, and to keep us on track for time, I think I'm going to have to move on to Ms. Petty, and Ms. Petty is going to provide us some information from a mental health perspective view. So I'm going to give you a few more minutes to answer these questions, and then I'm going to go into the ending of our panel here. So just a few more questions. So Mr. Conway and Mrs. Conway, I appreciate you so much for all of your truth and your laughter that you've given us today. So I am going to provide maybe, let's say, 20 more seconds to answer those questions there, and then I'm going to end this poll and we'll move over to our next speaker here. Okay, so thank you.
I'm waiting for
I'm
him.
coming back to y'all at the end here. All right, so I'm going to end this poll. Okay, and then I am going to spotlight Ms. Petty here. Okay, and then as we mentioned earlier, we were talking about this during the COVID-19 pandemic. We all have experienced grief and loss, and grief associated with loss of a loved one. And definitely Dr. Green, she enlightened us and shared some information with us about grief. And so Ms. Petty is the founder of Selah Solutions, LLC, and a licensed professional counselor and a licensed substance abuse treatment provider with over 20 years of experience providing clinical mental health treatment services. Janice is known for her journeying through the peaks and valleys with her clients by providing a safe and comfortable environment that is conducive to sheer transparency and healing. As a speaker, facilitator, trainer, and administrator, her mission is to educate and dispel the myths associated with mental health disorders. She empowers groups, families, and individuals to move beyond pain to peace through counseling and coaching by utilizing various treatment approaches. So everyone, I welcome Ms. Petty, and I am going to pull up her presentation here. So bear with me as I share my screen and we do this again. All right, so Ms. Petty, move forward, and you're muted, Ms. Petty.
I am, and I said a whole bunch.
Okay,
Good
there you go.
afternoon. I am excited to be here with you today, to be able to join this rich discussion. It has truly been a pleasure listening to Ms. Sharon and Mr. Hampton, as well as Dr. Green. So with all this valuable information, I like to add on to it to continue to the discussion in helping you understand about grief and loss, to simply define what it is, to add on to what Dr. Green was talking about when she talks about the stages of grief, and certainly identify, how do I cope with this? As I grieve, how do I cope with this? So this pandemic has caused us to suffer grief and loss in a number of ways. There has been loss of freedom, the loss of touch, loss of finance, loss of social interaction, and unfortunately, the loss of life. This world will eventually move beyond this pandemic, but you as a caregiver may not move beyond your current situation. So whether you are a family caregiver, whether you are a paid caregiver or a volunteer caregiver, whether you are an independent caregiver, caregiving is a hard, challenging, stressful, and emotional task, to say the least. And I acknowledge, yes, I acknowledge and understand that this can be a very difficult place to be. First slide, please, number 1, Keisha. Initially, Dr. Green asked, how are you? And she gave you 4 choices. But sometimes we move beyond those four choices. I hear people say, oh, I'm okay, or I've had better days, or it depends. If you look at emotions, none of those fall there. You very well may be telling the truth, and that is how you're doing. But I'd like to ask a question. And since we're being honest here, how are you doing? I want you to take a moment and simply place that term or that emotion in the chart, in the chat box. How are you doing? Let me understand some of your emotions. Simply tell me, how are you doing? Anybody frustrated, sad, feeling helpless or hopeless? How are you? Feel free to share. Just put it in the chat box. Someone say they're sad, they're hopeless. Somebody said they still just okay, and we'll take that too. Can I get one or two more? How are you?
I see a yearning.
Okay, they just a little slow on my end, but what else do you have, Keisha?
I see a sad. Okay, anyone else? Depressed.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing how you feel. What I would like to do, if you're not doing it already, I want to empower you to tell the truth. Yes, I want you to speak in your truth. When someone asks you how you're doing, let them know. Let them know, but because it may not just be okay. So you may want to keep this chart handy and look at it and see how are you doing. So let's talk about the difference between grief, loss, bereavement, and depression. Those are some heavy words. Loss is the fact or the fact or the process of losing something or someone. Ironically, when we hear the term grief and loss, we automatically think about death and dying. But grief and loss come in so many forms. Loss of mobility, loss of respect, loss of identity, loss of being independent, being able to do things on your own. Grief is a natural response to the loss. So when the loss occurs, there's a form of grief. Bereavement is the state of being in that grief. You may be bereaving. And the depression is a mood disorder that causes a continued persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest. So at this time, I want to know, what stage do you think you're in? Do you have that poll question, Keisha? What stage do you think you may be in? Are you in a loss and mourning stage, grief, bereavement, or depression? There we go. Thank you. So if you would, take a moment or two and tell me what stage you're in. And you know what? It's okay to say, I don't know where I am. I don't know what stage I'm in. Someone is in the loss and grief stage.
So the questions have been launched, so please feel free. Okay, I see them coming up. I see grief, Ms. Petty. I see depression. I have some that I don't know. Some are in the loss stage. I have another depression and grief.
Thank you so much for sharing. Some of you can identify what stage you're in. And I know it's hard to sometimes figure out. The truth of the matter is we can go between these stages at any given time. You think you may be in the bereavement stage, and then there comes another loss. And we'll talk about that too. How do I manage between these? So let's talk about the difference between grief and depression. Your next slide, Keisha, if you would. What's the difference between grief and depression? Now, Dr. Green alluded to this and she began to talk about it a little bit, but let me help you understand. There are similarities, there are differences, And then there are some shared differences, some shared similarities. Now, if you want to truly find out, seek out a licensed professional, whether it's your medical doctor for med management, because yes, that's okay, and or a licensed therapist. The perfect combination would be if I had medication and if I got to the root of the issue by having a licensed therapist. So look at the slide ahead of you. You will see that grief can shift between emotions, while depression does not. Grief can cause you to be preoccupied with the loss. However, depression causes you to become withdrawn, loss of feelings of hopelessness, and a possible guilt. I saw that emotion of hopelessness before. Grief allows you to be reassured from other people, while depression causes you to focus inward. You're focusing solely on yourself. Grief can allow you to connect with your family and friends, while depression, I just don't want to be bothered. You isolate. Depression and grief share a number of common similarities, to include, as you can see, the loss of interest, fatigue, anxiety, sadness. Those are just to name a few. This PowerPoint slide will be available for you later to go back and look at to see, am I in a stage of grief? Am I in a stage of depression? And who do I need to reach out for assistance? Who can help me move beyond this? So now that we understand emotions, we understand the difference between grief, loss, bereavement, and depression, and we understand grief and depression. Now, I'm going to add a little more to this. I want you to know that grief and depression can also resemble some form of anger. So sometimes it's about, is he grieving? Is he depressed? Or is this anger being masked? Let's talk about some stages of grief. Next slide, please, Keisha. Dr. Green discussed 2 stages, but there are at least 12 or more stages of grief. We're going to, for the sake and respect of time, we're going to quickly run through these. First, there's abbreviated grief. When you think of abbreviations, you think of short. This grief doesn't last long. A prime example of abbreviated grief is when the widow or widower finds love soon after the death of their loved one. Their grieving process wasn't tenured, long span. Then there's the absent grief. This is the grief when this is the form of grief when there's no type of grief or signs of grief are displayed. I can't grieve because I need to take care of my children. Oh, I got to stay strong for other people. Or you feel pressured not to grieve. You'll have time to grieve later. This is called absent grief. The next slide, Keisha, if you would be anticipatory grief. Not going to go much into this. Dr. Green did a good job of talking about anticipatory grief earlier. This is when you anticipate something is to come. A person anticipates maybe having a surgery that may cause them to lose their independence. Or you've been there with that terminally ill person and you anticipate the death of dying. Dr. Green went a little step further. She talked a little bit about chronic grief. And this is when the chronic grief, you've been there the whole time, the tenure has been of the person has been chronic. This person shows no signs of improvement in the grieving process. It's just the same all the time. When a person is grieving in the chronic stage, it doesn't get better, it doesn't get worse, it's just the same. That's a dangerous place to be because you're going to either move forward or backwards at some point. But when you're not moving at all and you're stuck, you're in a place of chronic grief. The next slide. Complicated. Complicated grief is a persistence for a prolonged period of time and begins to interfere with the day-to-day life. you can't function, you can't move forward. There are other components involved, which may very well be depression. Parents grieving the death of their child, or the bereaved person was in a dependent relationship with the deceased person, which causes you to not be able to function. And it prolongs because of secondary grief, and we'll talk about that just in a moment. Dr. Green gave a wonderful example of the death of her mother-in-law and how her grief was delayed. Delayed is when there's a significant gap between the loss and the bereavement. A widowed person is left to take their children on their own. The bereaved person must take care of their other commitments. They must honor those commitments, and there's no time to grieve. So these are examples of delayed grief. The next slide. So, and then there's the distorted grief, or this is the next to the last one. Distorted grief is the type that is accompanied by when you become angry, when there's a lot of guilt, when there's a lot of hostility, when there's self-destructive and behavioral changes. It may be caused by a medical error or ignorance. The doctors or the medical professionals didn't respond. It may be a grief that happened in a tragic accident, like Mr. Hampton talked about. Or there may be a mass grief when you have a mass shooting or some of the events that has happened in the world. This is distorted grief. And then there's your normal grief, whatever normal is. Grief is normal, natural, and a necessary response to a major loss, such as the death of a loved one. So this is the normal grief. And be mindful, as stated before, grief does not have a time span. I have another polling question. Now that we've talked about these 8 stages of grief, where would you say your form of grief lies? Where would you say your form of grief lies at this time? Is it a form of anticipatory? Is it distorted? Is it normal? Is it complicated? Is it chronic? What type of grief do you currently have? Abbreviated, short-lived, absent, not grieving at all. What type of grief are you experiencing? I want to add, as professional caregivers, voluntary caregivers, don't be quick to think that only loved ones and family members experience this type of grief, because that's one myth that's associated with grief and loss. Any responses, Keisha?
I was muted. I apologize. I see absent. I see anticipatory. I see complicated. I see another anticipatory. I do not see any delayed or distorted at this time. Oh, I see one distorted and one normal. I'm sorry, they're popping up.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those responses. That lets me know that you're able to identify the type of grief that you're currently experiencing. When it comes to grief, when you lose the primary person who dies, or there is a loss, there's a secondary loss too. Those secondary losses are typically intertwined with the primary loss. It may be that loss of income, that loss of identity, that loss of dreams, a loss of confidence. I heard Mr. Hampton talk about, I just want to be able to pull my pants up and finding a way, having that confidence, being an older man who's used to doing everything, and now I have to depend on someone else, Ms. Sharon, that loss of identity sometimes. So there are 2 primary types of losses. There are 2 types of losses. One is the primary loss. 2 is the secondary loss, those losses that come along with it. So after you find yourself in a after you suffered a loss, you find yourself on a roller coaster. Next slide, Keisha, if you would. No, you didn't sign up for this roller coaster. You didn't ask for a ticket. You don't even want to be on it, but you're going to be. It's mandatory. You're going to go through this. And it's the stages of grief. You just heard it a little bit earlier. And in the stages of grief, there are 5 of them. They're not necessarily you're going to work them in the order. You can go back and forth, and you could enter and exit at any time and find yourself there again. You find yourself there because of triggers. You heard something, you smelled something, you thought about something, there was a holiday, or it may be just because. I must admit, just the other day, I wished for my mother, who has been deceased over 20 years. I had a hard decision to make, and only if I could talk to my mama, I knew it would be all right. So having that going back and forth. So the first stage, as you could see, is that shock and denial. And this you can't even believe what's going on. Somebody wake me up because this has to be a bad dream. You experience those feelings and emotions of numbness. You're questionable regarding how am I going to make it? What are the next steps going to be? How will I move forward? Anybody ever been there before? Then you may become angry. You're angry regarding the situation. You're angry because of your loved one and or, let me say, recipient has put you in this place. You're angry with your family and friends because they're not there to support you and they just don't understand. You may become resentful because of the pain is so difficult. How did I find myself in this space? And then you begin to bargain a little bit. You may go through some depression and detachment. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to be bothered. I want to try to figure this out on my own. Or you may start to bargain a little bit. Most of the time, people bargain with their higher being, higher power. I would do anything to make this normal again. I wish it was them instead of me. What if I do X, will Y happen? If I would not have done X, Y, and Z, then this would have never happened. Oftentimes you find a sense of guilt here as well. And then we get somewhere to the acceptance stage. Accepting does not mean that it's okay. It does not mean that you're fine. But what it means is I have acknowledged what is going on, and I am beginning to readjust my life and to find myself in a sense of normalcy. Sometimes we get off the ride, sometimes we get back on, and this could go on and on and on. Somebody once asked, how long do you grieve? And my response was, how long do you plan to live? Because we could grieve for our lifetime. It gets better. You go from pain to peace. That you may be crying now, but it gets a little better. When I hear somebody talk about their mother, I'm not angry anymore. When her birthday comes around, I can now go take flowers and sing happy birthday versus bury my head in a pillow. It gets better, but it gets better in your time. It doesn't have to get better this year, and it may not be, but it gets better in your time. We're almost there. You all hang on with me just a little bit longer. So the next slide, if you would. How does grief impact your body? Because it does. It impacts you mentally, physically, emotionally, and socially. Here are some examples. I'm not going to read them all to you. You may not eat. You may not sleep. You either eat too much or don't eat at all. If you find yourself having shortness of breath, if you find that you're having severe chest pains, that's the first sign you may see a medical professional. There may be times again when there's denial, when there's resentment. Your self-esteem may suffer. There may be some bad dreams. In some cases, depend on how you're grieving and what happened to cause a loss, there may be some PTSD involved. There may be a sense of failure. And then socially, you may just want to withdraw or isolate. So as you can see, grief impacts every aspect of your life. But how do I get through it? Here's some ways to get through it. The first thing is you need to check in with yourself to see how you're feeling. And if you can't tell anybody else the truth, tell yourself. The next thing, you need to be kind, you need to be patient, and you need to be gentle with you. No, I didn't sign up for this, but be gentle and kind with you as you go through this process. Let your emotions be expressed and released. Trauma is when we keep this stuff bottled up and we have nowhere for it to go. It starts to come out sideways. I eat too much, I drink too much, I say some of the wrong things. So when you don't deal with your issue deals with you. So learn how to deal with your emotions. Take time out for you. Yeah, I might need to get away with other people. Get that plane ticket, get that bus ticket, go to an Airbnb. Just decide I'm not talking to anybody today because I need to look into me. I need to check in with me. Ask for help. And when they say, can I help you? Say, yes, you can. Accept the help, not a sign of weakness. Find your way back to that sense of normal. It may be one thing. Today I get up and make my bed up. Today I get up and take a bath. Today I'll go to the grocery store. What are some of the things that are normal? My favorite thing is journal. Miss Sharon says I have one person I can talk to. Some people don't have anybody they can talk to. Journal, write it down, or join that support group. Better yet, if there's a therapist you can talk to, there's a counselor you can speak with, or you may be able to speak with your pastor or minister or spiritual leader. Preserve those memories. Look at those pictures, look at those videos, and remember the good time and not focus on, I remember the demise of this person, or I remember when I grieved this loss, or how this happened. Think positive and don't make any major changes. Sometimes when we make change out of emotion, we make the wrong decision. Learn how to manage your time, because when we have a lot of idle time, we get in our mind and we become stuck. Manage your time effectively. Moving on to my resources. These slides will be available for you. If you find yourself needing additional help, call the Crisis Hotline. You can also reach out to SAMHSA. SAMHSA will be able to provide resources for you. You can go on Psychology Today to find a therapist who works with grief and loss. I don't need that right now, but I do need some paperwork. I do need some worksheets to help me. Google the Therapist Aid, one of my favorite sites. Search grief and loss, and there are some things there for you. So in closing, I certainly hope you were able to glean some information from this presentation today. And if nothing else, please know that you need to be patient with you. Of course, you didn't ask for any of this, but in order to get back to your sense of normalcy, you have to go through the process. And going through the process may not be easy. And every day you may not have a dry eye, but know that things will get better. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Patty. I am going to put my camera back on a minute. But this session has been wonderful. And when I say wonderful, I mean absolutely wonderful. And so I really have enjoyed you all. I'm going to stop sharing the screen here so you can see me again. But I just thank everyone for participating today. And I know that Ms. Petty will have to leave us shortly. But if you all have questions, I would definitely say put those in the chat box. As Ms. Petty said, I will make the slides for Ms. Petty available and the resources that Dr. Green has provided. They will be available to you all as well. And so, Ms. Petty, again, I know if you have to leave, please feel free. Any questions that you all have for Ms. Petty that Dr. Green might not be able to address, I will make sure that Ms. Petty gets those questions, and we will make sure that they get answered. But definitely, we had such a good conversation, so much so I feel like we might have to continue this conversation, and it might have to be a part 3. But what I would like to do is I want to take some time and just kind of roll through the questions in the chat box, because I want to make sure that I don't ignore anyone. And I know that Dr. Green was moving through and answering some of those questions I see. But does anyone have any questions that I did not see here? Earlier, I saw a question, and I believe maybe Dr. Green answered it, but Dr. Green, if you didn't, please feel free. But it was a question regarding, I'm trying to find it. It was about the, let's see, in the spirit of involving seniors so they can be engaged in daily living, can someone share tips on how to encourage participation in activities like chores? And Dr. Green, did you want to respond to that? Or maybe you did, I can't quite see.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that one of the things that has worked for me is to really talk about how my loved one, or in some cases client, how if we do this together, then it's going to prolong my ability to care for you. Or thinking from an empowerment standpoint of trying to empower our loved ones so that they can continue to do the activities that they're able to do and don't have further declines. And I think there's kind of a shift in your thought process. And I talk about rescuing versus helping. And so when we are, if we start our caregiving situation and activities with more of a helping attitude, meaning doing only the things that your loved one is not able to do, then we preserve our energy to do the things that he or she is not able to do. We also empower our loved one to maintain their highest level of functioning. And sometimes what I see, especially in the professional sphere where you have a paid caregiver, is that they will come in and just start doing everything for their client. So for example, I had a student and we went through our nursing assistant training together. I was training the student, and we always talk about empowerment. And so she was working on a rehabilitation floor where the client was a paraplegic. And she went in and did everything for that client all day. And then when she was getting ready to leave, she saw that the client was sitting up and had the head of the bed up, and he was doing stretching exercises. There was nothing wrong with his arms. It was his legs, and there are a lot of things that he was going to need to learn to do before he went home. But because she assumed that he couldn't do things, she spent all of her time that day doing all of these things. So I always think about rescuing. Are you in a rescuing? Because if you're rescuing, then somebody has to be the victim, somebody has to be the dependent, or are you helping, where you're only doing the things for your loved one or client that they actually need assistance with. And that way they're empowered to do the things that they can do for themselves for as long as possible. And that decreases your opportunity for burnout. So that's a long answer to a brief question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Green. So if you all have any more questions, I see all the comments that are here, and thank you all. You said it was an awesome presentation. Thank you. So I do have one final poll, because it is important for us to get your feedback on how you thought the session went. So I'm going to launch that poll, But this gives us feedback on how useful you thought that this presentation was. So please take a few moments, and I would like for you to answer those questions that you see on the poll here. So go ahead and answer those questions. And it's how useful was this listening session for you? What's one new thing that you learned about the webinar and that you plan to use? So if you see those questions on the screen there, and the last question, well, the second to the last is, what services are you not receiving that would be useful to you? And then that last question is, where do you currently go to access services? So please take a moment and answer some of these questions for us, because this allows NCBA and the Diverse Elders Coalition, along with the John A. Hartford Foundation, to provide assistance for caregivers and bring things to caregivers, so we can continue to have platforms like this listening session and invite great speakers such as Dr. Green and Mr. and Mrs. Hampton and Mrs. Petty. So please take a moment and just answer those questions, and I'll give you a little longer here before I end this poll. But it was a great session, and I don't see any more questions that have popped up in the chat box here, but I'm going to keep mindful of our time here, and thank you all for still hanging with us today, because I realize we are a few minutes over. But yes, please answer those questions. I'll end it in about 10 seconds, the poll here. Okay, I am going to end that poll now. So I'm ending the poll. Okay, thank you. So as we close today, everyone, I would actually, on behalf of the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging Incorporated, the Diverse Elders Coalition, and the John H. Hartford Foundation, these are our partners, and we thank them, but most of all, we thank you all for participating. To Dr. Green, to Mr. and Mrs. Conway, and to Mrs. Petty, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because when I call, you answer the call and you are present to help us out. And from the first session to this session, I definitely feel the need to support caregivers in our community and how important it is. But today, with Mr. Conway sharing, I realize the importance to include those receiving care, because they are dealing with challenges and difficult emotions as well. And we have to acknowledge that, and that's really important. So again, before I close, I guess I want to ask Lauren or Angie if they want to come back and if they have anything that they would like to say. Angie or Lauren?
Hi, Keisha. Thank you. Dr. Green, Mr. and Mrs. Conway, Dr. Petty, thank you. I hope that you all will come back. I mean, each of your presentations, your sentiments were kind, patient, and gentle. And I thank you for those words, Dr. Petty. I on my board here so that I can remember when I have one of those days to be kind, patient, and gentle, and more so than anything, to always speak my truth and be true to myself. So again, thank you on behalf of NCBA. I hope we can have a part 3, and I hope you will join us again. Many thanks and have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, and Lauren?
Thanks. I'll be super quick, but just echoing Angie and Keisha, all of the speakers were so incredible. Hampton and Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. It was so relatable. I laughed, I teared up, all the emotions, and Dr. Green and Ms. Petty were amazing as well. It just really makes people remember that they're not alone in this process of grieving and making it through. So thank you so much. It was a fantastic event. Thank you all.
Thank you. And everyone, I am actually, let's see. I am actually in our chat. I just placed NCBA is having another webinar tomorrow, and I just would like to invite everyone to that. So the webinar is on financial protection for older adults, and it's tomorrow from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the chat there, I did put the registration link for that Zoom session tomorrow. So if you all are free at that time and would like to learn more about financial scams and seniors, please feel free to join us. At the conclusion of this webinar, all of those that registered, I will send you a copy of those resources and those slides for your information and for your review. So again, I'm going to give you back your time, and it's 12:41. So thank you all. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Conway, I'd be remiss if I didn't let you all say something. So do you have any final words that you would you actually would like to say here? I don't want to leave you out, but you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. We thank you for having us, and we pray that we made a difference. I'm very grateful to be alive. Okay, so anything we can do to help somebody else along the way, we're willing to do that. I think the first 11 years of our marriage, Sharon had so many surgeries. I think, yeah, so many surgeries that I was taking care of her. I was doing all the cooking and everything for her. And she says, now it's her turn to take care of me. Okay. So I'm grateful. Okay. Very grateful.
Okay. And Ms. Sharon, do you have anything to say?
Well, I hope, again, it just came, the Lord put it on my heart to have him be a part of this, because he is such a part of my life as his caregiver. And I thought it was important because very often we don't get a chance to hear from the person being cared for because they need some mental incapacitation. They just can't do it. They have Alzheimer's or dementia or coma, and you don't really have that insight from someone who is, and he's very articulate. That's part of the problem, but anyway. And so, so I thought it'd be very insightful to have him as a part of this. And he is still my friend. And 99% of the time, he is an awesome, awesome person to be shut up in this shoebox with. But it's when that 1% show up, it push all the rest of the stuff out the windows.
You heard me say I'm grateful, right?
You are grateful. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing.
I don't have, you know, all my eggs are in this one basket right here, because I don't have enough time left in life to train another woman to be a good wife. So I got to keep this one, okay?
Yes, sir, you do. You do. So again, everyone, I'm going to give you your time back. And this, the recording of this webinar will be available. Just give us a little time and we will have it up on the NCBA website and our platform. So again, thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon. We appreciate you. Bye-bye.